Well, I decided during Holy Week, we're going to focus on the Gospels, which obviously we focus on the first reading normally, but because of the nature of Holy Week, and the first reading is always letting you know that this time, well, if for the most of the year is letting you know that this time is coming, I thought it would be good to focus on the Gospels because they alone are talking about this time. By the way, considering if I focus on the Gospels all week, and we'll see at the end of the week whether I do that, something you need to know, we have finished looking at the Old Testament for a while. Now, why do I say that? Because the first reading in all of the Easter season, which obviously begins on Sunday, is always from the Acts of the Apostles. We basically go through the entire Acts of the Apostles over the 7 weeks from Easter, for Easter. So we're not going to see, except for possibly during special days during this time, we're not going to see the Old Testament, at least not in any of the normal days for Easter. So we're not going to see Old Testament again until we get to ordinary time, which is going to be 7 weeks from Easter. That said, let us look at the gospel reading, because this is one of my most favorite ominous readings, because it has this interesting line here, which I've discussed with you before. And so again, we're going to do what I always do, and that is we're going to look at this through the Catholic, let me get this right, the Catholic public domain version. I knew I'd get that down. A Catholic public domain version of the Bible. And we're going to be looking at John 12, because that is the gospel for today. And so if we go there, and we're going to see the story here. So let's look at what it says. Maybe I can read it through. And it's actually John 12, 1 through 11. So let's go there and see what it says. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus went to Bethany, where Lazarus had died, whom Jesus raised up. And they made a dinner for him there, and Martha was ministering, and truly Lazarus was one of those who were sitting at table with him. And then Mary took 12 ounces of pure spikenard ointment, very precious, and she anointed the feet of Jesus. And she wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the ointment. Then one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was soon to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the needy?" Now he had said this not out of concern for the needy, but because he was a thief. And since he held the purse, he used to carry what was put into it. There you go, right from square one. If you look at Judas in the Bible, you notice, Judas Iscariot, you notice never has anything said good about him. So there's no foreshadowing with Jesus. It wouldn't be like, with Judas rather, it wouldn't be like, and then Judas looked over to the Pharisees with a ominous view, kind of giving a foreshadowing. There's none. That's Judas. He's the one who betrayed him. He was a thief. There's nothing good about him, just so you know. So that when Judas betrays Jesus, no one's surprised. There's no foreshadowing at all, right? From day one, the whole thing is Judas is bad. So we see that. And so right here we're saying, and by the way, on top of everything else, he was a thief. So we see that. So he didn't care about the poor. He cared about money. Now, he said, we saw that. Okay, but Jesus said, "Permit her so that she may keep it against the day of my burial. For the poor you have with you always, but me you do not always have." That is where it says, the poor you will always have with you. Why will you always have the poor with you? Isn't there any way to solve poverty? Well, there's several reasons, very possibly. One is you're not going to solve poverty. Another one is many people seek to live as the poor because in that they want to come closer to Christ. So you'll always have the poor with you, yes. Now, this is one of the lines that absolutely fascinates me. So, now a great multitude of the Jews knew that he was in that place, and so they came, not so much because of Jesus, but so that they might see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. And the leaders of the priests planned to put Lazarus to death also. This is where I say every single year, how evil do you have to be that you want to put to death someone who was raised from the dead? And this is where I point out that you can see that the leaders of the Jews, the chief priests and the leaders of the Jews, are turning hardened of heart every single day. And what is bothering them the most? What is the source of evil? I want my world my way. Now they are blind in their evil so that they can't even see that if they kill someone who was raised from the dead, that's really incredibly obnoxious. And they probably can't see the effects of it either. Because if they kill Lazarus, the people are going to be livid. So you can see that they are blind in their rage. They are angry. They are so angry, they've just unable to see the truth. So then it continues. For many of the Jews, because of him, were going away and were believing in Jesus. Then on the next day, the great cloud that had come to the feast day when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. I think that line, let me just check to see if that's in the original version. Oh, no. Okay, so that line is not in the original version. So you're looking at this powerful message. So what ends our reading today is because many of the Jews were turning away and believing in Jesus because of Lazarus. So they were so focused on demanding that Jesus does what they want him to do. And they were so focused on that they're now blind with their rage. Now, one of the reasons, and this is an important consideration, one of the reasons why the leaders of the Jews, and always keep in mind, and this is really important, the leaders of the Jews are responsible at that time for the death of Jesus, as are the Romans. And it's important we understand the Romans and the leaders of the Jews because they represent, between the two of them, in the Jewish mindset, the entire world. Because in the Jewish mindset, there are two kinds of people, Jews and Goyim. And Goyim are the non-Jews. So that's why it's really important that the Romans are involved here, because it was the Romans and the Jews that put Jesus to death because Jesus died for all, and therefore they represent all. Now, another thing, I always say this every year, I say it all the time, is that we're talking about the Jews putting Jesus to death. We're talking about the Jews at that time. Now, it's important to understand why I say that. It's simple. Because if we turn around and say, they're the Jews and they did it, then you are missing the whole point. Because if, as I always say, if this happened in a Catholic world, which anachronistically is not possible, but just for the heck of it, just go with me on this. If this happened in a Catholic world, the Catholics would have done the same thing. Oh, trust me. Oh, trust me. Yes, the Catholic leaders, some of them, not all of them. I mean, certainly not all the way up to the Pope, but yeah, Catholic leaders would have done exactly the same thing. Oh, trust me. That's a fact. So when you look at the way the Jewish leaders are, you can't turn around and say, oh, those are the Jews, and all the Jews will be held responsible for their death. No, because they were acting humanly, and they were focused on their greatest fear, which was to lose their entire culture and the temple to the Romans, which happened anyway. And so they acted in this way because their greatest fear was that the Romans would conquer them and destroy the Jewish nation, which ultimately they did in 70 AD. It's actually the 70s AD. So they're focused on the world and the worldly issues and the worldly things. And that's why they're blind to the truth, because they're unable to trust in the Lord. They are trusting in their own political way of thinking. And that's what's going on here. But the reason why I think it's so important to say that that you can't turn around and say, wow, that's the way the Jews are. No, because the Catholics would have done the same thing. And I hope no one is offended by this. Actually, I don't want anyone to be offended by this, but I thought I'd throw this out anyway. It's something I say all the time. I think it was Nick Fuentes, who I am not a follower of Nick Fuentes. What do they call someone who follows him? A groiper or something like that? I have nothing to do with this guy. Not a fan. But Nick Fuentes says something along the lines is that Hollywood should be run by the Catholics, not the Jews. So let the Jews do it. They're doing an okay job. And there is a fact to that, because one of the oldest sayings, I don't know who said it. It probably was a saintly person. Maybe I can look that up during the break. Said that no institution that is, I can't remember the exact words, maybe I can find them. No institution that is run the way the Catholic Church is run could exist as long as the Catholic Church exists, which is further proof that it is run by the Holy Spirit. And I absolutely agree with that. So there is a truth to that. And you do have to understand, you can't turn around and say, oh, it's the Jews. No, Catholics would have done exactly the same thing, or any other group. The atheists would have done the same thing if they were in that position. They really would have. We're going to be back on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Did you know that the Catholic Audio Media Podcast is available on various podcast platforms? You can find us, among others, on Podbean, which is our home platform. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, among others. Just look for Catholic Audio Media, all one word. On some platforms, such as Spotify, look for Catholic Audio Media, 3 words, and subscribe and listen to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. Thank you to Copilot and the fine folks in AI. I found the actual quote. It comes from Hilary Belloc, and according to Copilot, the exact quote is, "The Catholic Church is an institution I am bound to hold divine. But for unbelievers, a proof of its divinity might be found in the fact that no merely human institution conducted with such naivous imbecility would have lasted a fortnight." Yes, there you go. And then another way of saying it is, no human-run institution could survive this long unless the Holy Spirit were behind it. That's the phrase I know more often. But there you go. And there is a source here. So let me see what the source is. The source is from Top 25 Quotes by Hilary Belloc. And this, again, comes from AI. So there you go. I always like to point that out every year. Don't turn around and say, look what the Jews did, because no, that is not correct, because the Catholics or whatever group you have would have done the same thing. But I think Hilary Belloc is right, which is why I also said about, he would agree with me with what I said with Nick Fuentes. How Hollywood should be run by Catholics. Are you kidding me? So I'll just leave it at that. And it's not that I am attacking the Catholics. Obviously, I'm a Catholic. But what am I saying in that? I am saying exactly what Hilary Belloc says, is that the proof of the Holy Spirit operating in our church is that it has lasted 2,000 years, despite it's been run the way it has. And so we understand that. And this is an important factor to put together. And, you may look at the Holy Spirit as running an institution that is perfect, but that's not the way it works. It's filled with humans who do human things and are and are just plain human, who many of whom are trying to do their best. Some of them are absolute clowns, and they'll find that in every institution. Some of them are absolute clowns, but somehow this institution has survived over 2,000 years because Jesus said, he promised that the gates of hell will not prevail against it. At the same time, he could have also promised exactly what, which that would be an interesting quote, but exactly what Hillary Belloc said. That whole same quote, here are the keys. This is on my church. On this rock I build my church, and knavish imbecility will not destroy it. But again, that is a sign of the Holy Spirit working through the church. On the same line, again, something to look at. And you got to realize that sometimes we look for proof of God's existence, and we look in the wrong places, or places where it's too small. We don't see it because it's too small. And the proof of God's existence, of God's actions, can be found in different ways than we can actually see if we just think with our mind too small. So you're looking for some sign of God existing, or if you're looking for some little indication, or you're looking for some miracle. But, one of the signs that the Jews are the chosen people is that they are still here. As I always like to say, find me Canaanites, find me Philistines, find me Amalekites. Granted, you will find people who can trace their lineage back to these cultures, but those cultures do not exist anymore, except in very minor conditions. These great cultures, find me Babylonians, these great cultures, which were powerful cultures for their time, do not exist anymore, but the Jews do, and that's significant. On the same line, the church has been around for 2,000 years. And Christianity along with it has been around for 2,000 years. That's significant. And always look for that. Again, let me bring up something I've discussed on this podcast many times. And it's one of the greatest examples, and it's from It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. And it's the story of the Big W. If you haven't seen the movie, I don't want to give too much about it, but it's a great movie. It came out in 1963, 64. It's a great movie. It had all the great stars from the time: Jonathan Winters, Buddy Hackett, Ethel Merman, all the names: Sid Caesar, Terry Thomas. I mean, all the Three Stooges are in it. All these great names, and they did a wonderful job in this movie. But the whole focus is they're looking for a big W. And the whole thing, the movie starts off with this. It's Jimmy Durante. The movie starts off with this car going off the road out in the mountains of California, and the mountains really are like that. And it goes off the road and off a cliff, and they find the guy. And just before he dies, he says, "You've got all this money hidden under the Big W, somewhere in Los Angeles," and they go. And it's this rat race, seeing who can get to the Big W first. And they run to find the Big W. And as you're looking at this, and if you don't want to hear this, this is a bit of a spoiler, then go forward about 30 seconds. The camera, as they're looking in this park for the Big W, and they're looking all for some kind of W, the camera pans back, and there are these 4 trees that are shaped together the way they grew, like a big W. And so that's what the Big W is. And so they're looking too small. And the same thing with us. We may look for signs of God's existence. And where do we find them? We find the signs of God's existence. We're looking too small. We have to look in a bigger place. Look at what Alexander Dugin said when the war broke out on October 7th in 2023? He said your focus has to be on the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is being an important place in the history of the human race. Goes all the way back to the days of David. Goes all the way back there. So when you see the Temple Mount being that important, even today, and that's what Alexander Dugin said, Vladimir Putin's philosopher, he said the focus is on the Temple Mount. That is really very, very fascinating, because it shows that this history, it's got a connection. All this history has a connection. And the fact that he can say, your focus has got to be on the Temple Mount, it's really important. And if you don't study eschatology, you won't understand what's going on. You've got to look at that and say, why is this place, which has been important for 3,000 years, which if you didn't see all the tourists going to see it, you would see the Dome of the Rock, but you wouldn't understand the whole history if you didn't see the tourists going to check this. Why would this place be probably the most important place on earth? And then if you look at another place, which is the Kaaba in, I think it's Iran. Is it Iran? Iraq. It's in the old Persia. You look at the Kaaba, that's a meteorite that fell. And they consider this extremely important. And there is another place for thousands of years. But you look at this, especially the Temple Mount, you look at this and saying, why are these places so important today? And these are some of the signs that what we believe is real, because it's lasted through time, just as the church, despite knavish imbecility, as Hilary Belloc would say, just as the church, just as the Jews, and these are important things to look at and to fully understand. Well, we're going to be back tomorrow. We're really looking at some fascinating things this week. We're going to be focusing on the gospel, because this is Holy Week. And then once we get through Easter, Easter Sunday, we're going to be focusing for the entire season of Easter on the Acts of the Apostles. So that's how we're beginning this week. We'll be back on the other side of the break. Remember to subscribe and to like. Going back to receive your high school diploma can make a huge difference in your life. Not just for you, but for your loved ones and your community as well. Across the country, thousands of free adult education centers are ready to help, with teachers who will guide you every step of the way. Find free and supportive adult education centers near you at finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council, and the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back, and tomorrow we're going to continue our discussion, obviously, of the gospel. We're going to be looking at Gospel of John. We're going to be in chapter 13, and this is where Jesus at the Last Supper discusses that one of his disciples will betray him. So we're going to see that. And then that brings us right into Spy Wednesday, where we see the actual betrayal of Judas. Remember, Judas is one of the two people who the church actually declares in hell. And the reason is not because he betrayed Jesus, but because he is so deep in, upset. I don't know what's the right word. So it's not really remorseful. It's so he feels he is not capable of being forgiven. Therefore, he refuses forgiveness of Jesus. That's according to the Council of Trent.
Yeah, you know the real is back. Father Carr Chaplain from the city of champions, dropping daily reflections coming straight from the field. The raw truth revealed for the strong-willed. It's the Greatest Act of Defiance podcast with your host Father Carr, a message built to last. The Greatest Act of Defiance podcast. That's right, the Greatest Act of Defiance.
The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.